Select Board Workshop with our esteemed colleagues from the town of Rockport, September 24th, 5 p.m. This meeting is broadcast live on Spectrum Cable TV, channel 1303, and web streamed at youtube.com/town Maine, all one word. And for those of you wishing to participate remotely, if you go online to where the meeting agenda is, there is a link that you can click to participate on Zoom. And if you do so, just raise your hand if you want to be recognized, and we will do our best to get to you in a timely way. So this is a combined meeting of the Rockport and the Camden Select Boards to discuss our wastewater treatment shared system, Camden system shared by Rockport. So I'd like to welcome you all, and if we can just go around quickly and just say your name and your role in this great adventure that we're on.
Susan, if I could just interject too, I just wanted to thank everyone on behalf of Rockport for you making time to sit down and talk with us about this. This is something we've been eager to do for a while, so we're happy to be here tonight, and I know you guys have a busy evening.
Yes, thank you. So I'll start. I'm Susan Dorr. I'm the chair of the Camden Select Board.
I'm Ken Gross. I'm on the Camden Select Board.
Chris Nolan, Camden Select Board.
John Veman, Rockport Select Board.
Michael Thompson, Rockport Select Board.
Michelle Hannon, Rockport Select Board.
Denise Munger, Rockport Select Board Chair.
Kim Graffam, Rockport Select Board.
Megan Brackett, Rockport Finance Director.
John Duke, Rockport Town Manager.
Justin Gove, the engineer for the town of Camden.
I'm Audra Kaler. I'm the town manager for Camden. I'm standing up here to try to get us all set up.
I'm Dave St. Laurent, Wastewater Superintendent, Public Works Director.
Thank you.
Town of Camden.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everybody. Tom Hedstrom.
And Tom Hedstrom. Great. Okay. Are there any other principals who are in the gathering or just interested observers? And okay, great. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So I guess we'll jump right in and go to the first agenda item, well, the second agenda item, which is an overview of the Rockport wastewater system.
Yes, so we're actually going to flip the order of this so that Camden, we give our sort of overview first. So the way we were thinking this could run in terms of format is that we'll run through our presentation, Rockport can run through theirs, and then the end will be questions and discussions so we can get through the more difficult material a little bit quicker. So I'm going to hand it over to our wastewater superintendent and public works director, Dave.
Good evening, everybody. I guess this is in order to all sit down and talk about this so we're all on the same page and understand all of the same things with both systems. And for the sake of semantics, we'll give the official titles in the wastewater world in our ordinance. The town manager, who's also the wastewater chief executive administrative official, myself, the wastewater superintendent, and Justin also, who's the town engineer. So I'm just going to quickly go through the overview of the outline of the presentation. So we're going to talk about the collection system, the sewer pipe material and age, the pump stations, the sanitary sewer overflows associated with I&I. We're going to go over the treatment facility, how the process flow works, the regulatory requirements, the PFAS sampling results, flow data, the 2023 plan upgrade, funding history, changes to the billing structure. Then we're going to go over system challenges, priorities, and projects with the collection system and the treatment facility. So I'm going to hand this over to Justin Gove, and he's going to go through the first segment of the presentation.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to try and make this quick, but there's quite a bit of information here that I'm going to be looking to convey. I love this stuff, so I might be long-winded. If I am, please let me know, and I'll try and speed it up. A quick inventory of the Camden sewer system. We have approximately 25 miles of gravity sewer. There should be. I'm looking at one. I mean, I like seeing myself on camera, but yeah, I think this might be more interesting for the rest of the folks. I need a. We are plugged into that HDMI. This is going to be a lot of pointing and hand gesturing if I don't have these. Here we go. Ah, beautiful, beautiful. So here we have a map of the Camden sewer system. Again, the approximately 25 miles of gravity sewer, 650 or 560 odd sewer manholes, 7 pump stations, 2 miles of pressure pipe or force main, and the wastewater treatment facility. I'm sure folks are familiar with how this works, but the wastewater is conveyed to the pump stations via the gravity sewers. The pump stations then lift that to either a higher point in the collection system where it continues to flow by gravity, or in the case of our Bayview and Rawson Avenue, it pumps directly to the wastewater treatment facility. Bear with the Luddite. And so looking at the breakdown of material and age of the pipe, kind of the key things to see here, about half or 50% of our gravity sewer is vitrified clay pipe, VCP pipe. And about 30% of our gravity sewer is between the age of 51 and 76 years old. Another 30% is between 25 and 50 years old. VCP pipe typically has a lifespan of around 50 to 70 years. So if you guys are doing the math quickly, that's about 30% of our pipe that's at just about end of life or beyond end of expected life for clay pipe. The pressure pipes or force mains, those are primarily cast iron. Most of those went in with the construction of the treatment plant right around 1970. So approximately 75 odd years old. And again, that's right around the end of expected life for a cast iron sewer force main, and in some cases beyond end of life, depending on soil chemistry and flow conditions. So really what I'm trying to show here is that we have a significant amount of older pipe and pipe that is probably at or about at the end of its useful life. This is a quick rundown of the 7 pump stations located in our system. The 2 large ones, again, are the Bayview pump station and the Rawson Avenue pump station. Both of those pump directly to the wastewater treatment facility. Actually, all of the flow that comes to the wastewater treatment facility comes from one of those 2 stations, with the exception of a single bathroom located at the treatment plant. Bayview, on a typical day in August when it's not raining too hard and we don't have particularly high groundwater, flow is around 360 gallons per minute. When we have 2 pumps running, we can discharge at a rate of 2,600 gallons per minute. But you'll note here that despite that significant difference between our typical flow and our peak flow, we have periodic sanitary sewer overflows at that location. So what that means is the flow rate coming into the pump station exceeds that peak discharge of 2,600 GPM. And at that point, we overboard raw sewage to the harbor. That is a sanitary sewer overflow. C Street is our other location in the system where we periodically have SSO events. You can see that's a slightly smaller station, 70 odd GPM typical flow, 650 GPM peak. But again, because of the peaking factor during precipitation events, we do see SSO events there. And I'll get a little bit more detail on that SSO in the next slide. Rawson Avenue, our shared pump station, typical flow into that station, and this would be the combined Camden and Rockport flows, is about 300 gallons per minute. The peak discharge with our 2 pumps running is 1,800 gallons per minute. And I've noted that, we've had some peak observed flow of around 1,500 gallons per minute. That was during a period of high groundwater and a large, rain event. And that really represents the most flow that we've seen come to the station to date. So you'll see that that's at about 85% of the station's capacity, and gives you an idea of if nothing changes, we don't have a change in our precipitation events or flow conditions, we do still have a little bit of bandwidth at Rawson Avenue. And that's reflected by the fact that we haven't had an SSO event there in the recorded past. Certainly not since we've been reporting SSO events. These are our 4 smaller pump stations: Washington, Cove Road, Mount Batty, Lake Beach. You can note from the flows, these are quite small, more in the 5 to 20 gallons per minute range. I've noted the capacities there. Lake Beach picks up the public restroom in one house, so it's very small. For these stations, this isn't really part of Rockport's interaction with the system, but I note it there to just kind of give a full inventory. These are not capacity limited right now, and we don't expect them to be. There's plenty of bandwidth at those stations. So back to the SSO events, the sanitary sewer overflows. As noted, those occur at our C Street and Bayview pump stations. That's where we actually have overflow structures. Typically, we see in between 3 and 8 events per year. This graph here, it's a lot of data and it's a little hard to follow. The orange line is showing the annual precipitation amount, and then the blue bar graphs are giving you total volume of wastewater discharged annually. And you'll see that they don't necessarily correlate particularly well. A wet year may or may not have a lot of SSO discharges, and a dry year may actually, it's not a direct correlation. So what we've seen is that it's really a combination of antecedent conditions that trigger those SSOs, one or more of these following items. Either we have spring high groundwater tables in conjunction with a precipitation event, or perhaps we have an extreme high tide event in conjunction with a precipitation event, or there could be a frozen ground conditions with a lot of snow melt that could trigger an SSO. And then the really high intensity precipitation events we've been seeing, those 2 or 3 inches of rainfall in a short period of time, often that'll trigger an SSO. Noted here on the bottom, our flow metering indicates that the infiltration and inflow are contributing factors to those sanitary sewer overflows. So to just give kind of a really brief discussion of what does that mean, inflow is a direct connection of precipitation, rainwater, or snow melt to the sewer system. That could be a catch basin that's tied directly to the sewer versus the stormwater, a roof leader that's tied directly into the sewer. And those would be some common ones. Whereas infiltration is really groundwater getting into breaks and cracks in the pipe. So the brown house here is an example of really all the bad things. You've got a roof leader that's connected. You have a foundation drain that's connected, showing a catch basin in the road that's connected to the sewer, cracks in the sewer service, cracks in the pipe, an illicit connection between someone's house and the stormwater line. So that would be a worst case house. Our blue house here on the right, all is well. The stormwater is directed to the separate stormwater system, and the sanitary sewage nice and tied into the sanitary sewer system. So again, SSOs, we're seeing those a lot because we have infiltration and inflow in our system. Jumping from the collection system to the treatment facility, this is just an aerial photo kind of showing you the flow through the plant. Flow from Rawson Avenue and Bayview pump stations come in to our headworks where we have mechanical screening, essentially bar racks spaced out to pick up large debris. There's aerated grit to remove sand that gets into the system before it gets sent through our pumps. From the headworks there, again, the screenings and the grit removal, it flows into our secondary treatment. That's a typical secondary treatment system where they're aerated tanks. We're providing a lot of oxygen and we're maintaining a population of bacteria and other microorganisms. Those bugs break down the organic carbon in the waste stream for us, And that really is the primary treatment mechanism at our treatment plant. It's followed by 2 clarifiers. That's really just about creating a big stilling well, a quiescent environment for the water to allow more material to settle out and collect at the bottom of those tanks. The other thing that we will collect from there and from our secondary is sludge. Sludge is the byproduct of all of those bugs eating and reproducing. They, just like us, when they eat and reproduce, they create new cells. That new cellular mass is sludge, and we have to dispose of that sludge. Some of it's recycled, some of it's disposed. So 6 here on my little pictogram is our sludge dewatering. The sludge comes out of this system primarily consisting of water, 96 to 98% water or more. And that becomes very expensive to dispose of because water is incredibly heavy. So dewatering, we take as much water out of that sludge as we can before we take the semi-solid or solid cake to dispose of at a landfill. So that's our treatment plant. And 7 at the bottom, that's where we have our effluent line. We introduce chlorine into it at the treatment plant. That chlorine mixes and disinfects in the effluent stream as it flows down to the outfall in the harbor. Before it gets there, we add sodium bisulfate to dechlorinate that stream before it discharges into the harbor. The chlorine kills the nasty things in the wastewater, but it also exhibits a toxic effect to the aquatic environment, so we dechlorinate before we discharge it. Getting into the numbers and some of the details of the standards here, this is our discharge permit, or part of our discharge permit. These are the regulatory requirements imposed on us by DEP for our effluent stream. You can see that they include a flow rate, which is a maximum or an average million gallon per day rate, and we report that on a monthly basis. BOD, that's biological oxygen demand. That's really just the organic carbon that's in the waste stream. Total suspended solids, that's whether it looks murky or not. And then fecal coliform is fecal coliform, settleable solids, total residual chlorine, mercury, and pH. So these are the requirements that we sample for on a regular basis. It's in accordance with the frequency defined by DEP. And I'll give an example of some of the results of this. But generally speaking, for the parameters that you see here on this page, the one that we exceed on a regular basis is our monthly average flow. So the limit is 1.21 million gallons per day. And periodically, we do see exceedances of that, and I'll show that in the next slide. So these are our monthly average flows of the effluent from the treatment plant over the last approximately 5 years. The highlighted cells are the months where we exceeded the permit threshold of 1.21 million gallons per day. You'll note that they occur most frequently in March and April. That's the periods when we have elevated groundwater table and see high baseline flow to the plant. We also will see high flows in the winter months, January and December. A lot of that's related to snowmelt and the fact that our winters these days, we see a lot of rain precipitation, see a lot of snow and subsequent snowmelt. So that's where we're seeing regular high elevated flows at the plant. As far as other parameters on here where we've had exceedances, incredibly rare. I think that going back through all of the discharge reports, I found 2 exceedances of BOD in the last 5 years, and they were very minor exceedances. And I have the hard copy somewhere in that binder over there. The other parameters that we are required to sample on a periodic basis and report to DEP. As part of our current wastewater permit, discharge permit, we were required to sample nitrogen from 2019 through 2022, including nitrate, nitrite, that's your inorganic nitrogen, and TKN, that's your organic nitrogen, or really synonymous with ammonia. The data from the most recent 2022 nitrogen sampling, I'm putting it up here. you can see that there seems to be a little bit of an inverse relationship between your organic nitrogen and your inorganic nitrogen. That's really a function of how well the secondary treatment is doing at the treatment plant. Nitrification, which is the conversion of ammonia to nitrate and then subsequently nitrite, can happen in aerated secondary treatment system if it's operating really well and you've chewed up all of the organic carbon there, which is preferentially broken down before the ammonia. So you can see some months we have really high organic, or not really high, but relatively high organic nitrogen versus the inorganic nitrogen. And then in August, September, they're a little bit more balanced. I can't speak to whether or not this nitrogen loading is particularly high relative to other plants. I can't really speak to whether it's particularly high for Camden Harbor and Camden Harbor's specific mixing and dilution. And I can't really say whether this is going to drive future permit requirements or not, but I can say that I have every expectation that at some point in the future, a discharge permit from DEP will include limits for nitrogen. They've expressed that to most communities in Maine, that if you have a marine discharge, you should at some point in the future expect to see nitrogen on your discharge permit. It's not there today. And I can't really speak to whether we would be exceeding permit thresholds or not in the future with these numbers. I merely present them because we have them and we can all chew on them together. Getting into a little bit more analytical, we're also required to periodically conduct sampling on the effluent for what really amounts to toxicity and priority pollutants. The whole effluent toxicity, that's looking at the survivability of shrimp and sea urchins in our waste stream. And then our analytical chemistry and priority pollutants are other things that we would be looking for, particularly priority pollutants for toxicity in the receiving waters. This is a lot of data. I'm just going to try and give you a highlight of what it means. The first couple numbers up there are the whole effluent toxicity or wet sampling. This one is a little bit counterintuitive because the number that gets reported is the concentration of your wastewater where you start to see a statistical decrease in the survivability of the shrimp and the urchins. So a higher number would be good because say at 100%, that would mean that at 100% concentration of our effluent, wastewater effluent, we see no statistical change in the survivability of the shrimp and sea urchins. If it were at 100 times dilution, so 1%, we were seeing impacts to those creatures. You'd know that that waste stream had a significantly more toxic impact on them. So for this particular round of sampling, you can see that for the shrimp, the reported value is greater than 100%. That means that when they took undiluted 100% concentration of our effluent, put the shrimp into that, they didn't see a statistical change in the shrimp's survivability. For the sea urchins, 25%, so that's a 4-to-1 dilution. At a 4-to-1 dilution, they started to see a statistical decrease, and actually I believe it's the fertility of the sea urchins that they're tracking. So those are both actually pretty good numbers. They're quite a bit better than the effluent limitation threshold values the DEP has, which is 3.7 and 2.0, so significantly better. The wet chemistry is really just looking at our typical parameters that we sample for and are treating for. It's really giving DEP just some baseline information to help them develop future permit limits. Moving into the analytical chemistry, we have first off the metals. You'll see that the majority of them are very low and quite far below the effluent limits that are established in Chapter 530, which is the surface water standards. The one exception in this particular report is you can see cyanide is at 21 parts per billion, and the acute threshold for aquatic life is at 24.4 parts per billion. So it sounds like we're getting a little bit close to that threshold, but I'll note that in a subsequent round of sampling, that was below detection. So it's not something that we're seeing all the time, but it is something that we saw in the effluent during this sampling event. Cyanide is a product of industrial processes. It's not naturally occurring. Lead, nickel, silver, zinc, all well below concern, in this case actually below the laboratory's detection limit. This is more data. We're getting into some more metals, some aliphatics, some base neutral extractables, and some PAHs, volatile organic compounds. You'll note that the vast majority of these are all below laboratory detection limits, so very low in the wastewater. We have some blips of the volatile organics. That's not surprising. Those are constituents you find in petroleum. So we're probably getting some in our runoff on the road. Some of that finds its way into the waste stream. You also could have atmospheric deposition of it. Very low values. And you may have noted, sorry, I breezed past this so quickly. There's a highlight here on mercury. It was below detection, but the detection limit at the time, so this is what the laboratory was able to achieve with this particular sample, was higher than the reporting limit. So that means the laboratory didn't do as well as the state would like the laboratory to do. We follow up with subsequent mercury sampling with a much lower detection limit via a different, they call it clean mercury sampling. So you get a parts per trillion level of analysis of mercury. And this is pretty consistent, this value, 2.5 parts per trillion of mercury in the effluent, well below the average effluent limitations for treatment facilities in the state that actually have effluent limits for mercury. In short, mercury doesn't seem to be a problem. PFAS, I'm sure everybody's familiar with PFAS, the forever chemicals most commonly associated with fireproofing, flame retardants, and just about everything that we package our food on and make our cosmetics out of. This is an emerging concern, largely because of the fact that its persistence in the environment, our inability to get rid of it, and the fact that we don't really know what the impacts of PFAS are on human health or ecological health. DEP has asked us to participate in a couple of rounds of PFAS sampling at the plant, effluent, influent, and some various places throughout the collection system. This is really just DEP's efforts to try and understand what is not necessarily the magnitude of the problem, but what are the magnitudes of PFAS present in these systems. Again, there's an enormous amount of work that still needs to be done to really understand at what concentration we start having negative impacts to human health and the environment. That said, you can see in our plant effluent when we sampled in 2023, PFAS is present at around 100 parts per trillion. That's nanograms per liter, parts per trillion. Plant influent, not too dissimilar when we sampled it this year, about 80 parts per trillion. Bayview Pump Station, very similar concentration to the plant influent. C Street, lower. Cove Road, also lower. And then we also sampled the leachate coming from the transfer station. And when I say leachate, really what we were sampling was the effluent stream from the recovery well at the landfill. That was at 857 parts per trillion. Landfill leachate is a known source of PFAS. More data, getting into some flow data. I'm just going to jump right to the numbers at the bottom of this screen. This is over the last several years. The total flow through the wastewater treatment facility on average is about 27 million gallons a month. Total flow through the Rawson Ave pump station is about 9.2 million gallons per month. Midcoast solid waste contribution to that is about 1.7 million gallons. Rockport's contribution is about 2.2 million gallons. And again, this is per month. So you can see that Midcoast solid waste makes up about 6.15% of the waste stream to the treatment plant. Rockport makes up about 9.3% of the flow to the treatment plant. And Rockport contributes about 26% of the flow to the Rawson Ave pump station. So about 1 in 10 gallons through the plant comes from Rockport. About 1 in 4 gallons that comes through the Rossinav pump station is from Rockport. Giving you a sense of where the treatment plant is at, recently underwent a fairly comprehensive upgrade. That upgrade included new headwork, so that was the inclusion of an automated bar rack, so screening out the large solids coming into the plant. New backup generator. Previously, the plant didn't have backup power. There were upgrades made to the secondary treatment, primarily new blowers, piping, and the addition of this modified Ludwig-Ettinger process, MEL process. What that is it's an anaerobic or anoxic tank at the head of the secondary treatment. And what that helps us do is minimize or mitigate the formation of flocculent bacteria. So really it keeps the system less scummy, less floatable solids, and generally improved performance out of the secondary treatment. Should be noted that an MLE process is not a nutrient removal process. It's not a nitrification, denitrification process. You may see some improvements to nitrification through the overall better improvement of your secondary treatment, but it is not designed for nutrient removal. A decision was made at the time of the design of the treatment plant that they were not going to include this at this time because it would have required additional tankage to the secondary treatment. So that would have been a substantial increase in the scope of the project. It wasn't part of our permit at that point in time, and we didn't expect it to be in our discharge permit in the next cycle or subsequent cycle. They did design the system so that at a future date, we would be able to add nitrification, denitrification to the system with additional tankage and reworking some of the piping. That's typically a staged aerobic, anaerobic process, so more tankage needed. The other big change, replace the old gravity belt thickeners with centrifuge dewatering system. So we are able to now get a solids that's about a 22% solids for our dewatered sludge versus before we were at about 14 to 16% or lower. So much less water going to the landfill, significantly reducing the volume and mass of sludge to be disposed of and associated cost reductions. Constructed a new analytical laboratory, and there was an upgrade to the implementation of a SCADA system, which is a computerized system that allows us to remotely monitor and adjust the treatment plant operations. That's that screen that's up at the top there. And that really is a pictographic of all the major systems throughout the treatment plant. We have similar capacity for our various pump stations, so we can control them remotely. We can diagnose problems remotely. And that really was the upgrade in a nutshell. That was a lot. And I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of this presentation. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Audrey to talk about funding.
All right. So just to give you a little background on how we pay for the operations of the plant and capital improvements. So prior to November of 2018, any major capital improvements, so anything that really needed to be financed, was not paid for by ratepayers. It was something that was funded by taxpayers. All the other operations at the plant and some of the smaller capital improvements were funded through our wastewater budget and the user rates that are calculated through that. So the reason that changed was that in order for Camden to receive a $1.4 million grant for the plant and collection system upgrades. So we talked about the plant upgrades, but there were also some major upgrades to the collection system that occurred as well. So the force main that connected the C Street pump station to the Bayview Street pump station was replaced. And there were a number of the smaller pump stations that were completely upgraded as part of that. So that grant money combined with a very low interest rate that was fixed over 30 years was only going to be possible because this program through USDA Rural Development, if it was funded through user rates as opposed to taxes. So the decision was made by the select board and then by the townspeople to shift the funding model. So for a period of time, There was a recapture agreement, but by the time the actual debt service for the project needed to be paid for, there was a charter amendment that allowed those improvements to be financed by ratepayers. So that this is important because it changed the billing structure. And it's something that I think that Rockport users as users on Camden system notice. So FY20 was really the first year that the town created and funded an account specifically for the purpose of not creating a shock to users when we actually had to make the debt service payments for the upgrades to the treatment plant, because there was a at least 3-year period of time between when we got financing for the project and when we were actually paying the debt service on the improvements when the project was completed. So over this time, we wanted to gradually raise user rates to get everybody prepared for that debt service payment, which is now we're in the second financial year where we're paying that debt service, and it's about a $650,000 payment per year. So the idea was that we would get everybody accustomed to that, as well as we'd have additional contingency for any issues that occurred either before, during, or directly after the upgrade to the treatment plant. So this is a table that just shows you the financial year, what the rate was, and the amount that was put in that payment reserve account. So 2020 was supposed to be the first year that additional $100,000 was placed in that reserve account. However, for some reason, the billing information wasn't changed with Maine Water. So around 2021, and I think this is somebody that's very familiar to everyone, the rate increase from both 2020 and what was budgeted for in 2021 was spread across those financial years. So that was quite a significant increase over that period of time. And, we continue to sort of up the amount that we put into that account for 2022 and 2023. And then we stopped funding it in 2024 because that was the first year of our debt service repayment.
Is that then showing that the rate changed mid-course of that fiscal year?
Yes. Yep. So that rate changed twice over that. So there was the original change, raise in rate, and then midway through the year.
So basically up $2, 100 cubic feet.
Yes. All right. So short and sweet. Over to Dave.
Okay. Now we've gone over basically the whole system. Audra's gone over the financial part. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do to try to correct these problems that exist. So I'm going to talk about the collection system priorities and the rehabilitation and replacement of the aging infrastructure, the mitigation of the SSO events, the expanding of the public sewer to underserved areas, up and coming collection system projects, sewer rehabilitation and replacement on Mechanic Street, Limerock Street, Union and Mountain, sewer extension on Molyneux and John Street. So Molyneux, we're extending the sewer to service 52 units at the Mountainside community. And John Street, we're basically putting in a new line that doesn't exist there to serve about 20 to 25 single-family homes, along with an upgrade to the sidewalk. And on Bayview and Rawson Avenue stations, we're looking at a force main replacement. And Justin had touched upon that. We're kind of at our life expectancy for those 2 force mains. So we're looking at these collectively, but we're looking at these projects. So how we're doing that is we're using a project priority sequencing and project completion matrix, which is this is looking at all components of a road. And when I say a road, I mean all pieces of it. This is talking about sewer condition, stormwater condition, sidewalk and multimodal needs, water, portable water, road surface, traffic calming, shade trees, and matching funds. So all these mean something when you look at a total road. So what we're doing is basically the driver for these projects is our sewer system, because our sewer system is our deepest utility within the road. And it's the most expensive to replace. So we're going through and systematically cammering these lines and then giving these a grade of between 1 and 5. And then based on the results of all of those criteria, will rank which one of these projects rises to the top. And by using this process, the objective is to tackle the larger problems and at the same time resolve the most of the problem with I&I. So as you can see, we're under evaluation on Lime Rock Street for sewer conditions, as well as on Mechanic Street. We are finding some significant problems on Mechanic Street, which also happens to be where we have our force main that's going to the treatment plant. But we haven't completed the whole process yet, and once that's all done, that'll help us guide us in the right direction to use the $12.5 million funding that voters approved in a bond to make these improvements. So some of the challenges at the treatment facility that we're trying to tackle are our high flows, which I just talked about, the way that we're attempting to resolve those. We're looking at, an updated discharge permit that'll come out soon, and potentially that could have some changes in it that could cost us additional money to implement, as well as technological things that need to be installed. One of the things that we're anticipating is to have to disinfect year round. One of the second things that we're probably going to see that could potentially cause us problems is PFAS within the wastewater treatment, wastewater, as well as the sludge. So currently there's really only a few ways of dealing with PFAS in wastewater. There's foam fractionation, there's reverse osmosis, and there's carbon filtration, all very expensive processes. And we're also looking at a lot of times in more mature and bigger facilities, they have pre-treatment programs, and what they'll do is they'll have the generator of the source of the contamination deal with that, and that could potentially, we're looking at that too. So upcoming treatment facility projects that we're going to be working on, we're preemptively going to start disinfecting year round, because we know that the residents of Camden want clean water, and they want clean water in the wintertime too, so that if they swim in the ocean, they don't have to worry about, any pathogens or anything in our wastewater. So we've budgeted that this year, and we're doing that. And it's not because we have to, per our permit, which we expect it to change and have to do that, but we're going to do that already. The second thing is the expansion of the secondary treatment to facilitate nutrient removal. Justin talked a little bit about that. That would be a major upgrade to the plant, which would, require additional tankage to go through the anoxic and noxic process to deal with the nutrients. And then the third thing is the evaluating and relocating our plant outfalls. So we know our plant outfalls within the inner harbor. We're looking into what it would take to try and get that out. Not saying we're going to do that. This is all stuff that's driven by policy and funding, but we want to know what would it take to do that, and is it something that is a direction we want to go in, so it's an option. So those are the things that we're kind of trying to tackle. That's pretty much it. I think Audra and Justin did an excellent job, and we have a really good team, and I think we're going to be able to, make some massive improvements with the system. But that's where we're at, and we're looking forward to hearing what the Rockport collection system is all about. So if there's any questions about our system, we're more than welcome to answer them. We can probably all come up here, and the three of us can, chime in on whoever has probably the best answer. Or we could do rock, paper, scissors, and we'll get that person.
No questions. I'll stay seated. Alice.
And I don't know how much, this might be not something that you're prepared to answer today, because I know we're just getting started with looking at the new permit, but the class of water body that we're discharging to is a huge driver of the standards. And my understanding is that we're at, right now, class B. And there's been talk about, in the future, we might want it to be a higher standard. And the driver of this permit has been that, as long as we don't make it too much worse. Is that any part of your calculation, or do you have any idea?
No, not at this time. I will say that in 23, the previous superintendent had submitted the application for a new discharge permit. I think our current permit expired the end of 23, and DEP is taking, in some cases, 2 to 3 years right now to issue a permit, but I understand they've hired a number of new permit writers and they're speeding up that turnaround. I'm coming from South Portland. We've been waiting for a new discharge permit for 3 years after our existing permit had expired. The feedback that I've gotten from the folks that were here when that application was submitted is that we would not likely see any significant changes to our effluent requirements and standards with the next permit that should be issued at some point soon, with the exception of the requirement of year-round disinfection. So we're not tracking for any major changes to our discharge requirements for the permit that we're currently expecting. But that's not to say that it's a 5-year renewal cycle. That's not to say the next one in 5 years, so that should be in 2008, but it'll probably push further. Won't. So I can't honestly speak to that beyond that.
And I guess I'm not saying that that's expecting that you're complying with the lowest possible standard that we can get away with from the state, which isn't necessarily consistent with the values of the people that.
Well, I think that if you looked at the data, we're certainly doing quite a bit better than our permit requirements on, sorry, probably can't hear me there in the nethers. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our permit requirements are a result of the classification of the water body that we're discharging to. And I guess what I'm saying is there are times when, for environmental reasons, we do, and in general, societies do more than just the bare minimum.
So obviously the town of Camden just made a decision to invest a substantial amount of money into the treatment plant, which is reflected in the 2023 treatment plant upgrade. I wasn't here. I wasn't party to the conversations about the decisions to, define what the scope of that upgrade was. So I really can't speak to that. I can say that the upgrade has certainly improved the secondary treatment process, and there have been water quality improvements directly tied to that. So I think that the town has shown a desire to move beyond just the standards of our permit. And I think what we're saying up here is that we recognize that there are going to be additional permit-driven requirements, and we certainly will respond to that.
I'm not attacking you or anything. I was not aware that we have submitted. So normally the select board would have to sign off on a permit application and there's a public comment period. And
again, this is 2023 and I can't speak to it. I wasn't here. I've only been here.
Can we get a
6
copy
months.
of that?
Sure, of course you can. Yeah, of course you can. I actually have it in that binder there, I think, so I can dig it up for you.
Awesome.
I certainly brought it with me, but.
I think the answer to just follow up with that. I think what we could do is look at like what a different water body type classification permit could look like, just to kind of see what the differences are between the two, so that we understand what those are.
That's what I'm curious how much lower the standards are for Camden Harbor than maybe somewhere else, and for what reason and under what circumstances. The standards might be higher and who would benefit. I know there's a massive shellfish closure that's a standing, there's a certain number of acres that are permanently closed to shellfish harvesting as a direct result of this outfall. Are there things that we could do to change that?
I think that's valuable information to know what the difference is between the two body types and what does it change in a permit. We could look at that. It doesn't change much for us, but it'd be interesting to see.
Well, I would say that from an operational standpoint, we're trying to operate the plant to maximum efficiency today. We're looking at changing our disinfection protocol to disinfect year-round, despite the fact that's not currently in our permit.
They've been saying that for 4 years. I've been told that we're going to start that.
All I can say is that we are doing it this year, and I'm making sure that that's happening. And so is Dave, and so is Audra. So I can't, again, speak to the sins of the past. I can only talk about where we're moving in the future. I would say for us to substantially change the quality of our effluent, that would require changes to the treatment processes at the plant. And having just come off of the plant upgrade, I don't think that there's an appetite to start a new upgrade today. Though
I know.
You know, we know that it's coming in the future. That's why we put it on this, you know, in this presentation. We want people to be aware that there's capital expenditures out there. Part of it's because of aging infrastructure that needs to be replaced. And part of it is because of changing expectations about the water quality. We put the extending the outfall on now because we know that that's been a desire of the community and that has the potential to improve water quality in the Inner Harbor. We can't answer whether that's permittable or technically feasible today or what the cost is, but we're committed to getting answers to those questions.
Could you give us just an update on the status of the consent agreement with the state and the impact that has on Camden moving forward?
Absolutely. So there was a period of time where communication had gone a little bit stagnant with our representatives at DEP, and there's been some changing of those faces at DEP. And then there was also a little bit of, I would say, a tailing off of mitigation efforts during COVID. So what we've been doing is really ramping those efforts back up. We did a number of smaller projects around the collection system this summer, directly targeting and looking at the I&I issues. We passed the bond ask in June for $12.5 million for improvements to the infrastructure. One of the main drivers for that is to take the I&I out of the system. So subsequent to me coming on, we've been in much closer contact with DEP, working towards, you know, the mitigation of those SSO events. So I would say that there may have been a little bit of a hiccup in communication in progress during COVID, but we're well back on track right now. And I think that the fact that Camden voted overwhelmingly for that bond demonstrates that we really have a vested interest in addressing that aging infrastructure, because that's really the primary problem. It's the old collection system.
We also had a meeting with our direct contact at DEP for wastewater, and they're fairly pleased with our results that we've given them, and they seem to be thinking we're moving in the right direction. So that's the general consensus.
John?
So we just there was a lot of publicity around the upgrade and getting accolades for, you know, being a best-in-class facility, more or less. I'm probably not using the right terminology, but you kind of glossed over that. It sounds like it's not doing what it should do, but now you're saying we're getting the recognition from the state that it is.
Yeah, and this is a funny line to walk. I would say that from my experience, it's a best-in-class facility as far as its operation and its maintenance. It's incredibly clean, tidy, and well-run, and equipment is being maintained well, which ensures the continued operation of the plant. And that's reflected in the fact that the number of permit violations that we have that are not flow-related or missing of a sampling of event, I believe is one in the last 5 years. But as far as best-in-class facility from the perspective of level of treatment, no, we're not there, because we don't have nutrient removal. We don't have tertiary treatment. We're not doing nitrification, denitrification. But I would say that there are not very many plants in New England, and certainly not very many plants in Maine, that are doing that yet, because that really is an emerging contaminant of concern for marine discharges. And I can't speak to how many communities have nitrogen in their permit limits, but it's something that it's going to be the ones with most sensitive discharges. And it's something that's really ramping up, and it's the next step in wastewater treatment. If I could turn back the clock and do things differently, or have had a seat at the table when we were designing the plant upgrade, I may have recommended implementing nutrient removal at this time and building out the additional tankage now. But I'm saying without having the benefit of actually had that seat at the table. I'm sure that there were very sound reasons why they didn't do that then. And I know that we're prepared and ready to do that in the future, but it will be a substantial project, and there's going to be a cost associated with it. Undoubtedly.
That basically answered my question too. That was kind of what I was.
And it's important to note that, you know, we're not a large industrial community with a lot of an industry that creates, we don't have electroplating, and we don't have a lot of these industries that cause a lot of wastewater that's high in toxicity. Not saying toxicity isn't happening and being sent to the plant, but it's at levels that are significantly lower in a community that has all kinds of industry. So, our plan is designed for the community that it serves. It's not saying that it can't be better, and additional treatment like tertiary treatment and this foam fractionation or any of these other items can be installed, or nutrient removal. Those are all things we're going to look at to make it better. But we're pushing the envelope to be better than other places, and we're going to do that. And the community has shown over and over again they're willing to pay for those things because they want clean water. They want they want clean air. They want this place to be a nice place that's taken care of, and we don't pollute the environment. And they've said it over and over again. Every time you look at the voting, people always vote in favor of these things. So I don't think that I think we're sized right. I think we're postured to be better, and I think we will be better. So,
But I think that the biggest threat to water quality and all the, the things that are most important to Camden residents isn't coming from the plant. It's coming from the collection system and the sanitary sewer overflows and the I&I issues that we're having that are overwhelming the system. So really, that's the new focus for all of us is our aging infrastructure and the collection system and the threat that that's posing, to the environment.
That sounds like a great segue.
That's what I was going to just say, because I'm
That's
watching
a
the
segue
clock
right
going.
into, let's.
Sorry
All
to
right.
take so much time.
No, it's great to
thank
have
you.
that
It's really
information. Thank
valuable.
you.
This is an ongoing conversation, so let's segue to Rockport. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, wow. There you go.
Oh,
Can you stand behind you?
Just on your knees,
Okay,
maybe?
all right, yeah. Let's try to stand down here. Okay, so everyone knows this photo. Thank you for doing this. Obviously, our conversation is a lot different. And largely, and thankfully, we don't have to talk about outfall, talk about what the treatment means and what we were really as a partnership. We look across the aisle and say, hey, let's work together and try to make sure that those solutions are environmentally conscious. This obviously Rockport's end of this we're gonna have a little bit of a different take, and I want to try to keep this as short as I can so that way you have a chance to talk maybe a little bit at the end of this. But let me just go ahead and jump in here. So this is our inventory. This is our sewer. There's two large pockets that consist of Rockport sewer system. There is the Village Area Network, which pumps to Camden, and the Glen Cove Network, which pumps to Rockland. Now, the dividing line, some of you may remember, we recently had completed a Route 1 expansion. Basically, that line is the South Street, sort of in the neighborhood of Penn Bay Medical Center, flowing north, is headed back to Camden. So Glen Cove is in and of itself, Samoset Resort, and so forth. Thanks to Rockport's name, 22 pump stations, 15 in the Village Area Network, 7 in Glen Cove. So that's obviously 3 times the number of pump stations and fewer users. Not a great match, but that's what you have to do. 20 miles of gravity and force main, 270 structures. And so where do we come in? So we come in through the Camden Street pump station. So if you're coming up from our office and take that left onto Camden Street, right as the town line, it's about, I guess, 3/4 of the way, almost to the intersection with Route 1. That pump station's right on the side of the road. So that's where Rockport's waste largely comes in. We also have the country end, which is a separate entry point, but predominantly most of what we have is coming through Camden Street. You want to take this one?
In terms of our flow data, currently our billed usage is around 49,100 cubic feet, which equates to about 99,000 gallons a day for our entire system. Our average annual usage to Camden is about 63,000 gallons a day when you average it out, or 63% of our total flows for our entire system come to Camden. which only represents about 39.4% of our allocated allowance in the last interlocal agreement. And then our average usage to Camden, to Rockland is about 18,100 cubic feet, or about 37% of our total annual flows. So about 2/3 of our flows come to Camden, and the remaining 1/3 goes to Rockland. We undertook a significant II study in 2019. At that point, we did individual inspections of all of our properties that were either connected to or had the ability to connect to our sewer system. We were able to complete this effort in a 5-month period, that summer into the fall. We did find some illegal connections and corrected those at that time. In the summer of 2019, we also replaced ground piping on School Street and Summer Street, which eliminated some II and stormwater issues that were happening on those roads. And as we continue to pave roads that are on our sewer system, we make sure that we are inspecting the in-ground pipes before we are laying new pavement. We do budget for annual jetting and camera inspections of all of our in-ground piping. All pipes are inspected on a 4-year rotation schedule. And we do have an annual capital funding for any potential issues found during that process so that we can fix them immediately. We do make consistent upgrades to our pump stations as part of our capital improvement plan. We did a major upgrade to our Camden Street pump, which included new pumps, a new SCADA system, and a new flow meter. When the flow meter was replaced, we found out that our flows were actually being inflated at that pump station by nearly 20% when it was replaced. And then we do monthly, quarterly, and annual reviews of the system. We contract with Water and Current to operate our system, and we go through that process with them, just looking at our flows, making sure they're where we thought we would be, so that if we do have an II problem, we can find it quickly.
So this is where, what are Rockport's priorities? What are our projects? What's as we look down the road? Again, there's really 4 major buckets here. Obviously, it's the bare minimum, which is to continue to maintain a healthy collection system and to maintain and minimize the I&I issues. That's obvious. That's what all of us want to do when we manage these wastewater collection systems. Secondarily, we want to talk, and these aren't really in any particular order, but it's next on the list. Wastewater treatment solutions, which support growing community development. That could take the term of interim agreements, long-term agreements, construction of a facility, but solutions for treatment, obviously, because we lack those right now, given the fact that our interlocal agreement has expired. The gap connections in the system for housing development. Some of you may have read about this. We received some grant funding of $1 million, a $1 million match to allow us to what we call infill, to allow us to connect areas that are unserved by wastewater, and to support affordable housing and other opportunities for people to construct lower cost housing. And then lastly is the Route 90 extension. This was part of the bond that was defeated by the voters in June. We received an ARPA grant for $1 million that will be reallocated to completing the design only of that stretch of road. But subsequent voter approval would be needed to go to the next step. So we would be able to say we have a set of plans ready for bid specs, or with bid specs ready to put out to bid. But obviously, there's a lot more that we have to talk about in here and beyond. So why don't you handle the budget?
So our wastewater budget has 3 major components to it. The first is administration. Our wastewater budget does cover a portion of particular staff members' wages and benefits based on the time that they spend managing wastewater activities. It also covers our other operational expenses, such as lien costs, legal fees, supplies, things like that. Then we have the operations portion of our budget, which includes 1.5 full-time employees, which is through a contract with Water and Current. It includes all our utilities, chemicals, and operation supplies needed, which again is fulfilled through that contract. Includes amounts for treatment for Camden and Rockland, and also covers our above and below ground capital maintenance for the system. And then we have a debt component to the budget, which covers all of our debt borne by and paid for by the wastewater system. Currently and historically, our system has not been funded by taxpayers and has been solely funded by the users of the system.
So our billing is very simple in that it's largely farmed out. So we work with Maine Water. Maine Water circulates our bills on our behalf. We have two separate fees. They're part of our bills. We have I'll do in reverse order. Usage, which is very, very clear to understand. You use this much water, you build this much wastewater. If you have a well, there's certain provisions for that as well. But we'll put that aside. And then secondarily, we have a debt service fee, which covers our debt and capital costs. So this is, and I would love to get more data and more flow data. So I was looking very carefully and squinting as Justin was reading. So maybe we can swap notes at the end, but just what we had, and so maybe it's a little bit different than the data you have, but basically the prior agreement talked about 161,000 gallons per day. In the past year, we used somewhere with our numbers were 5.8 and 7.4% of that permitted capacity. With the improvements made, which is what Megan referred to, and going door to door and our I&I improvements, we've stayed below from what we had seen. And so what we have is a use of somewhere in that mid single digit range, a reserve capacity of 12.5% for part of the old agreement. And then in recent years, the amounts of money that we've spent is somewhere equivalent to about 15 to 25%. It depends upon the year. It depends upon the amount of capital, amount of different needs, but roughly it's in that range.
John, just to clarify, the amount of money we spent is the amount of money we've paid Camden for treatment of water has been 15 to 20% of the Camden budget.
Right, and to go on to that issue, so every gallon that's pumped through your wastewater treatment plant is treated equally, whether it's from I&I, whether it's from Joe Smith on Pearl Street, or Bob Jones on Main Street in Rockport. Everyone gets equally represented in that circumstance. The challenge is not all of those users pay equally. And so the challenge is for all of us, it's universal. It's a universal challenge. How do you maintain those costs and pass on those costs equally while there's forces, sometimes environmental, sometimes wherever they may be, that are bringing water that has to be treated by your system and safely put out into the bay, and how do you then pass those costs on? So that's a challenge, and I think Audra did a fine job to sort of describe that shift of when the town of Camden had to change its methodology in and how those capital projects are funded. It created probably an unseen ripple that still is being felt today. And that's really, that ripple is a lot of the conversation and where some of this comes in. So this is a real rough and dirty look of the FY25 Camden budget. But and it says, okay, so if you look at what the approved amounts are in each department, and then if Rockport was paying that 12.5% share, what does that account to? So, it's $2.2 million budget. If it's 12.5%, 280,000, math simple. You come down here, this is our usage in 100 cubic feet, 34,000 and change, total annual gallons. That's a simple math problem. Averaging that out of gallons per day, about 70,000. At the bill rate, it's 1088, which is what every user pays. And then that creates a build rate of 371,000, or about 16.6%. So if that 12.5% number was used, you'd be talking about a rate or something equivalent of $8.21. So it really, and again, there's different numbers that can, to be zeroed in on this, but it's just meant to consider, I think, and I think my hope is as we walk away from tonight would be that something has changed in the equation, and we have to just talk about how does that fairly represent all of those forces, the I&I forces, the Camden user forces, the Rockport user forces, and how do you sort of get back together and make sure that you're accounting for all of this in some way while also knowing a future that I think Audra, Dave, and Justin really laid out well. Is there's a lot to come for all of us. So this is just one particular take on it, but it's one that I think it illustrates some of the challenges Rockport's in viewing this situation. So
yeah, and it just represents the general notion with some sort of support for it of, where Rockland charges us an industrial user rate. So we don't pay the same rate that every Rockland user pays. They charge us an industrial user rate because all our flow comes at one pump station and we're not a bunch of individual homes. Now, we don't want to we're getting into the weeds quickly on a discussion.
I'd like to speak. I heard Camden give a pretty good overview of our wastewater treatment facility and our capacity and such. I think at this point you've definitely jumped into the politics. Is that part of the agenda? Are we at that part of the agenda where we're moving into the political side of this, the advocating for certain percentages and whatnot?
I don't think we're advocating for percentages, Tom. I think what we're talking about is the state of play of how the rates come together. So I think that this is, to understand where each of us are, we have to understand where each of us are coming from. And I think there can be a lot of mischaracterization and misunderstanding in that process. As someone who's been part of this conversation at various levels, as you have, the more that we can hear from each other and talk about these things and be clear with each other, I think that's best for all of us. I don't plan to go on much further than this. This is information to lay on the table and to work with, just as the other information about future plans are. I think the next piece would be to talk about where the state of the financial relationship stands today. And that's our next slide. And then we're moving on to some issues. So that's my plan. And I'd like to get through the rest of it if I can. You've got 17 minutes before you wanted to end the workshop. So I don't want to take too much more of your time if I can. Okay. So current financial standing. So the current outstanding balance between the two communities is $69,158.17 as of today. So this consists of two different buckets. There's a disputed late payments charge and interest fees from an unapplied check that was received back in March. It wasn't applied till November 2023. I think that's a fairly simple process that we could all sit in a room and quickly resolve. The second is a 15% reduction that Rockport applied to Camden's rate, standard usage rate from FY24 per the mediated terms that the two towns had worked out through mediation in the spring of 2023. It was verified by Camden staff when we put together the budget. This is not an issue that was part of the lawsuit, but it's obviously part of the $69,000 that we're talking about today. Again, I think there's terms that everyone sitting down in a room could work these things out. All the outstanding amounts related to the lawsuit from our perspective have been paid in full as of fall 2023. An invoice that was received in July 2024 was paid in full for the currently billed amount without any rate reduction applied. So there's no beginning July 2024, Rockport's budget is as approved by our select board, fully funds the Camden rate as approved by the Camden Select Board or Camden Wastewater Commissioners. So there's no distinction, no difference. This is an issue of that period of time between July 2023 and June 2024. So that's the only outstanding piece of that. So a list of challenges. So this is just a long list, a laundry list. But these are some of the issues from Rockport's perspective as we see them. Adequate reserve treatment capacity for development. I think that's obvious. That very, very quickly goes along with the lack of interlocal agreements. The lawsuit obviously is troubling. Rockport's usage rate for its users is too high. Again, these aren't meant to be necessarily solved by anyone or any group necessarily in this room, but just to understand the challenges our users are facing and our board is facing. Personnel challenges, leadership in-house and in-house labor. We had a great presentation by some great staff that you have from Camden. Fantastic. We farm that out to an outside entity. That then creates situations where we show up to a situation like this, and while we may be well served by our consultants, it does create a distinction. And I think part of the challenges we've faced in going through this dialogue, before in 2016, 2019, is to not have that give and take. And I think that's a very important piece. And also in-house labor. So our agreement with Woodward and Curran includes those 2 full-time or 1.5 full-time equivalent employees. Obviously, if we were to end that contract, we wouldn't have anyone working for Rockport in the area of wastewater. Climate change, that's an obvious one that we're all facing. We have low-lying pump stations. We have power outages. When the power outages occur, we have our staff running around with a portable generator hooking up to these pumps to try to get the wastewater out of the wells. We're running around doing that. And with 22 pump stations, they're busy. So thankfully, we have a good crew, people who know our system well. But obviously, that's something we're seeing over and over and over again. Potential pretreatment requirements, and I think that's been said best in what we can talk about here. The political challenges and effect that has on funding agencies. That's 2-pronged. There's at the federal level, we're in an election year. Who knows what that happens and where that goes? We've seen that the congressionally directed spending earmarks has been a very successful avenue for gaining grant funding and funding at the federal level. And that's something that we've been successful with and Camden's been successful with, and we've been working with our partners in doing that. I think that, and this isn't a political statement, but who knows what happens? I have no idea, but that can have some impacts on how we work and what projects are seen as successful. The more we can do together, it obviously builds a stronger case for whomever we're working with. But there's that. Locally, there's political challenges. The town of Rockport just had a $33 million bond that was turned down. That obviously has impacts with how we work with our funding agencies and how do we plan. So political challenges all over the map, right? And then the last challenge I want to list is ownership of its future. So agreements are great, and an interlocal that lasts 30 years, I mean, that's longer than many people have lived in this town or are in Rockport, for that matter. But for part of the challenge in Rockport's involvement with the prior plan upgrade was a challenge of lack of ownership in what that entity was. It limited our ability to bond and pay for that cost and participate. And then of course, here we are all these years later. That future potential of working together and owning shared ownership is something that, of whatever our disposition is of this wastewater, is important. It's critical. In the same way, if you have a house and you need a septic system to build that house, you're not getting a building permit until you have that septic system. It's the same way in a town, but on a much larger scale. We have to have that capacity from water coming in through the well to water being disposed. And if you don't have it, you don't have control of your future. And so all of these conversations are so important in a bigger scale. And so whether it's Rockport, whether it's Camden regionally, having that control is important for all of us. So this is just a real glossy view of potential solutions. But when Audra and Susan and Denise and I met, I didn't want to leave you dire and leave you in the muck on this. And I wanted to talk about some solutions and some things that potentially could work between these two communities and in a bigger picture. So the first potential solution, and this is up to the boards to determine, but is one, to create a working group, small working group with staff and board members from each community to negotiate a short-term agreement for interlocal. And I put some dates on here to get us started, and it's always good to have goals in mind, but to try to complete that by the end of the calendar year. Second, settlement. So work with each town's attorney to end the lawsuit. Again, those timetables are aligned for a reason, by the end of the calendar year. And then the next one is a little harder to put in one box, but let's try. So set another meeting date for both groups to meet together, and talk about long-term solutions and collaboration in areas of wastewater and beyond. This is something that the two boards have done in the past, to some great success, to some limited success, but at least to great to share ideas and share and collaborate. Some of these ideas that are sort of on that list of a big picture, and obviously there's more. Hearing Camden's proposal or presentation, the outfall pipe extension, improved discharge quality, a MUD, which municipal utility district, grant opportunities. It's big picture, but it allows everyone to sort of start to get our hands dirty on it. The idea would be to, when I say completed, I'm saying completed by saying a meeting. But I said by March 1st, 2025, to have some collaborative goals identified and feasibility assessed. We have for the Camden board, in case you're unfamiliar, the voters in Rockport approved an article at the June town meeting to create a citizens group, which was appointed by our select board in July. They're working on collaboration of wastewater, and working not just with Rockport and Camden, but with Rockland as well. They've been given the task to get back to the select board by the March meeting, the select board's March meeting, in hopes that there's something that's brought forward before, so we could bring them before our voters in June. And will that work? Will that not work? I don't know, but that's a timetable that, again, I'm trying to just lead some breadcrumbs for us all to maybe find some ways to work together. But that's really the source of it, and certainly glad to help answer any questions or go forward. So.
First of all, that was great, and I'm really happy to be talking to everybody finally. I think there's a lot that when you hear like, oh, well, some people are concerned about this and some people are concerned about this, and not everybody on the Camden Select Board is concerned about the same things, and probably the same is true with Rockport, and most of us or some of us weren't even here when this all started. So it's nice to try to think about clearing the air and just saying, okay, everybody's doing their best. And so I've really enjoyed listening also to all of the presentations that you guys gave for the proposal that came out. That helped me to understand a lot better. So I just think you guys have done a very good job trying to deal with a very difficult situation over there, because it is expensive. So what I thought was sort of the most important thing, a little bit maybe from Camden's perspective or from my perspective, is what Megan said with the percentage currently being used of that interlocal agreement from before, so that 161,000 gallons a day was what was set out, and that I think started out at 150, and then it got added to a little bit when the schools were built. And then when I look at all the problems that Camden already has with the current amount coming, and to realize that you guys aren't even coming close now to that capacity, I think that's where a lot of the sort of misunderstanding lies, that you guys have been told, okay, this is how much capacity there is for Rockport, and you guys aren't anywhere near that. And then we're realizing at the same time, whoa, we're already having big problems even without that. So do we have any business signing up for another long-term agreement at all? So, I mean, I personally think that the next step is probably similar to what you're saying, that a smaller group of super interested people kind of start to, please. to try to figure out what are the basic questions that need to be answered by both towns, how do we know where it makes sense to collaborate and where not, what can we answer now, what might take a larger study. So that's my 2 cents.
We go back. We're gonna go back to our seats, but we'll turn this off.
Well, I guess, I guess it's, we kind of like overwhelmed everybody with a lot of information from both sides. So, we can answer questions, we can have a little bit of a discussion, but I think that, there's a lot to this, and, any sort of problem solving is not really going to happen tonight. So this is, just kind of about baseline understanding. So I think that, maybe just kind of figuring out how we're all going to, commit to sort of moving this forward in some fashion together is probably a good outcome, given how much we covered tonight.
Yeah, and if there is an appetite for having future, a future get together now that we can sort of mull over, I'm assuming we'll share our presentations with each other so we can go back and look at slides we might not have been able to see. But to agree that there's enough common ground, whether it's a long-term agreement or a short-term agreement, but enough common ground to work together and find ways we can help each other with the challenges.
Yeah, I think Allison's point is well taken that, when we look at our system and the challenges that we're facing, it is a little, to consider any expansion with Rockport it takes us right up to the limit, or it could, but we have to, because that's the way the system is set up now. And so to that end, there's no way around discussing how we're going to craft that.
Susan.
John.
Could Rockport play a role in helping you solve some of these issues? I think that's.
Well, I'm going to defer to the experts on that. I would like to say yes.
And what would that look like?
Right. Perhaps Dave or Justin can.
We identified as some of our primary issues. I'm sorry. Some of the primary issues that we identified are the I&I in our collection system. That's really Camden's issue. Looking at the numbers from Rockport, it's clear that while I&I may be present, it's to a significantly lesser degree. From the expansion of the permitted treatment volume at the plant, and the improvement of the water quality, that's really a question of time and money. Those are things that we can do. It's construction and it's changes to the infrastructure at the treatment plant. But I can't speak to the relationship of the two communities, but certainly, if there were a financial partnership towards that end, I don't see a technical reason, an engineering reason that would bar that.
Let me try to put that in layperson's terms. Can you increase the capacity of the plant to handle more flow?
With changes to the plant infrastructure, yes.
With investment?
With capital investment.
All right.
And I would also say it is worth pointing out that the permit is on a 5-year renewal cycle, and it is not uncommon for the discharge amount to change with permit cycles. I would say the DEP would want to see us making additional efforts treatment-wise and in our collection systems to offset that. But there's the potential for that conversation to be had at the state level with the development of the next permit. I can't speak to the outcome of that, but certainly we would be remiss not to pursue it.
So can I add to that real quickly? So some of the things that we're not talking about here are the impact to the harbor with additional flow. That's significant. Camden bears the burden of having an outfall pipe in their inner harbor. Rockport doesn't. Okay. That's significant. That's in a lot of communities, the host community who is taking in a different community's waste, whether it be wastewater or whether it be solid waste, whatever the utility is, usually the guest community pays a premium and the host community enjoys a reduced rate. That's a common practice. It is. When the burden of the facility is having an impact on the location. Whether you agree with that or not, that's a common practice. So I understand the argument of saying that your percentage of flow is, mathematically less than what you're paying for. But there's also the impact that it's having to the harbor. Just increasing the flow, our capacity to our treatment plant isn't going to solve the problem. The problem is the fact that we're treating stormwater, and we need to reduce the amount of stormwater that we're treating. And that one of the questions I do have is what is the age of the collection system piping in Rockport? And I don't think you just resolved your I&I problem immediately. That had to have been a longer process than just 2019, I think, what I heard.
Rockport system was built in 1989, 1990.
Yeah, so that's the issue. Your system is significantly younger than ours is. Ours is aging, and we need to start investing in replacing it, and that's what we're attempting to do. But I don't think the solution here is just upping our permit to put more.
No, that's not what I'm.
And I don't think Justin's saying that. I mean, the DEP is going to say, we would really like to see you take some of the stormwater out of your system.
Right. And I guess the main point, though, to John's question, is the issue is not capacity at the treatment plant.
Right.
The issue is capacity with the collection system.
Not entirely. No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can
I
just jump in?
You guys can debate this
internally.
And Dave, I absolutely appreciate your perspective on what the rate should be. I didn't want to go into that end of things. What I was trying to focus on is what are the problems long-term that we can help you focus on and help support you with if relocating that pipe is something that is important and would help increase the flow or get us a bigger permit, then maybe that's one of those things we put on the radar. That was really all I wanted to know. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to, create a divide here, but there is the side that, I mean, we didn't get into any of this in our presentation, right? We left that part out because this was really just supposed to be informational more per se. But there is that portion of it that's unspoken, that Camden does have the pipe in their harbor. And that means something. And I think you're right. I think the extension of that pipe is a significant effort to probably help correct that, but it's still going to be in Camden's harbor. You know what I mean? And I think.
But it's going to be there whether we're part of it or not.
Exactly. But I agree.
So that was really all I just wanted to, because I know Allison was concerned about that, and so is Tom. And I think Tom's got his hand up, by the way.
I do. What I heard is what Camden needs to improve our system is capital. And what I heard Rockport say is they don't want to put any more capital into the system. In fact, they want to pay less.
No,
I'm a little bit disappointed that the politics came into
We didn't, that certainly wasn't our intent to say that. If that's what was heard, that really was not what we were saying. I think what John's exploring is, are there opportunities?
I'm talking about the slides. I think it was pretty clear in the slides that there was quite a bit of politics built in. And I was disappointed by that, but that aside, what Camden is concerned about is the impacts that this has on Camden. And Dave said it really well about Camden Harbor specifically. The treatment plant is in our, on our real estate. We did just pay for a significant plant upgrade, which Rockport did not participate in. We sent you an invoice for your portion of the upgrade. And to my knowledge, that invoice never got paid. This partnership really broke down several years ago, and to rebuild it is going to take some work. It's going to take, like Allison said, some people who are interested to really dig into it and try and see if there's a benefit for both communities. But I think the onus is on Rockport to convince Camden what the benefit is for Camden.
I will say that looking at all the old newspapers, this is what happened. It's exactly what happened before. Camden didn't want to take Rockport's wastewater. Rockport didn't want to pay for a plant. And it took several rounds of it being voted down by Camden voters. And then there was an agreement that it was exactly what John's saying, that the idea was the additional revenue from Rockport was going to be enough to help Camden solve its I&I problems. And there were ads taken out in the newspaper. And I think that all would have just continued. The current interlocal agreement maybe would have just continued. But we had this opportunity to all kind of look at this more carefully. Like, what would it mean if we lost Rockport's revenue, kind of when some of those things weren't paid? And it caused some of us to look back and say, okay, well, what was said at the beginning of this when Camden residents agreed to take Rockport's wastewater, and there were a lot of promises made. And can we say now that we've made good on those promises? Is I&I better now? No, it's not. Everything is, if you're going to just go by the numbers, things are worse. And so what people keep saying to me is, what's the benefit to Camden? And right now it's revenue from Rockport. And is it enough to be worth any potential downsides? We do hear when there's stuff that's swirling around near that pipe. I mean, I've been called down there so many times, like, what is this, Allison? Is this toilet paper? Is this? And I don't think it is. I think we answered that it's not toilet paper, but it does create questions. There are harbors that have turned green in other places because of nutrient loading. And so I think some of this isn't Rockport's fault at all. It's just Camden has to think about, okay, well, what is the water quality standard that we want to achieve? What questions do Camden residents have? So that's why it's going to take a lot more talking. And I think most of us can't answer that tonight, sort of what is the water quality standard that we need. But Camden residents, I think, do have a right that ultimately they would have to vote on another interlocal agreement. So I think the general public has an appetite to be able to ask more questions just about our own system. Is it safe to swim in the harbor? I think so, unless it rains. But I think people in general want better answers than that, and it's going to take some time.
And I think just the big picture question is, are there ways through grants or other ways that we can help on it from a capital perspective to get the kinds of treatment we've talked about, the nutrient removal, the big picture things that could really overall improve the situation in Camden Harbor? And that's not to say we insist you take our wastewater. It's just, is there an opportunity here to improve things? And I understand that the I&I is something you guys are sorting out. You've got the, so that's why we are talking about really a short-term agreement for the interim, and then potentially exploring those longer-term opportunities again through grants and
we do need a
working
short-term
together.
agreement. I mean, it's happening
We
right
do.
now. We need to sit down and figure out what it's going to look like for the next few years at the very least. So,
Right.
So in the interest of everybody's time and respecting, I guess we're going to give 5 more minutes and then we'll, I don't have a long history with this apart from living in the community, but I haven't been part of these conversations. This is new to me, and I don't want to be naive, but I am hopeful that we can start anew. And I appreciate Tom's frustration, and I really appreciate Allison's deep research and history on this and the expertise that all of you have brought to the conversation. Looking at next steps, whether it's constructive for all of us to be around this table again, it seems like there are enough foundational issues that we really didn't get to go into having to do with how the two towns are interacting. I mean, it seems like we got both towns presenting fairly clearly, and now there's this intersection that is really, what we need to navigate forward, which seems like it would require another gathering, whether it's all of us or a committee that's selected. I think having this group or a subset of this group without others at the, for a next step would seem to make sense, because we're all kind of at the same level of data in. And so John has I appreciate a little bit of a time frame, keeping things somewhat on a calendar so we don't lose sight of it. And would there be an appetite for another meeting within a month in order to just, and we could map out an agenda that would be
I think with a
more
small
concrete.
working group, that would be achievable.
A small working group to
Susan,
come up with-
I just have a silly
Yeah.
question now that we're an hour and 11 minutes in. What were the objectives for this meeting? And who and how is the agenda established? And what will be that for the next meeting?
Well, the objective was to restart a conversation between our two towns over an issue that is one that we need to address, and with some issues that had been languishing.
And I'd say because a lot of those issues came about because of a lack of baseline understanding across both boards of each other's systems and situations and plans, the idea was to give everybody that sort of baseline knowledge so that we can all move forward together. So that was the goal of the presentations tonight, was that Camden explained our system to Rockport and our challenges and some of the future plans that we have, and vice versa with Rockport and their system.
So was that what this Rockport Select Board wanted as well? I'm just wondering, did we meet the objective of what we were trying to do here?
Yeah, I think we're ready for the next step. I mean, we'd hoped maybe there'd be more time tonight, but it's good to have a common understanding of the system. So I think that was accomplished. And, we went further in our presentation, not again to be political or anything. It was really just to get the importance, raise some of the important issues that we would anticipate discussing.
No, the facts are facts, and it's good to have them out front.
I mean, I guess what I would love to see happen is there's some of us who love talking about this, who want to talk about it more, and I think can help get somewhere from that. I would say a few of us from this group should get together and try to create a document that has, summarizes some of the main issues, some of the outstanding questions. What does Camden still need to answer? What does Rockport need to answer? That could, if nothing else, be for the public and, an understanding of these are the things Rockport's concerned about, these are the things Camden's concerned about.
Or maybe
And-
even for a joint meeting at that point, a more sort of
Right, so we have
formed up,
something to.
so the rest of the select board members together can evaluate that.
Right, what do we all agree on? I would love to volunteer for such a committee. I like the idea of it being the subsets of the select board and not as much as outside committees, I think are good. I think this is something that the select boards do need to take a little bit of ownership of. And, or whoever, whoever, it's really important that it be people that are knowledgeable to some extent, I think.
Yeah, and I'd like to be part
I
of
thought you had a really great committee in Rockport, I will just say, but,
So to that end, do we want to select now a working group?
I think you guys can decide who you want on.
Say that
I
again,
would think-
Denise.
Yeah, how about each board goes back and picks who they want to
Okay.
send, and we
Yeah.
can talk about,
Okay.
John and I can help organize
when the meeting is going to be.
Yeah, and then, but also want to keep things moving and have
Yeah.
a meeting within this month, the October, I
Excellent.
guess.
Excellent. Does everyone feel good about what we got to and,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we really
Yeah.
appreciate
Ken?
everyone taking the time because I do think this was,
We have some folks who are interested also, and I was just wondering if this working group will be open to people who are not on the board. Just a question.
Well, I think you have a group working in Rockport that has members who are not on your,
right. And we can get information from, I mean, we're not cutting them out, but I think.
that was sort of an outgrowth of your referendum.
Yeah.
Let's just let the select boards
I
decide
think
what's
that-
appropriate. You know, if there
Yeah.
are people on the select board that are good, that want to do it, then the select board gets to make the choice.
I mean, if the goal is to hammer out another agreement, that's a board level process and a manager level process. So it isn't something that we would open up to the general public. As there are other aspects that we might be exploring.
Right.
A working group, but I think in the short term, if I understand the way that the process is going, the first thing that needs to be addressed is an agreement, which is done at this level.
Yeah.
Um,
And
So in-
potentially some of the longer term, more complicated issues like extending a pipe out or improving the treatment
Right.
of the effluent.
Yeah.
Who, we do have other people who have expertise and can bring those to bear. But I think to get where we need to go for next steps, I'd suggest select board to select board.
Dave, did you have?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, usually we bring in people from the public when there isn't the expertise or interest on the select board, and sometimes that makes sense. And both towns might even answer that question differently, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I think.
Great.
All right. Thank you all for your time and commitment. And we'll take next steps as appropriate, and everyone will be kept in the loop. And we'll go on.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.